This episode is proudly brought to you by Optimum Financial Services Group. Optimum has the expertise to guide you through investment, tax, retirement, and estate planning, with a tailored solution to your individual needs. Our objective is to provide you with an optimum solution to protect your wealth. Optimum has expertise in medical aid, legal services, asset finance, and short-term insurance, as well as specialized services in commercial, marine, aviation, and personal liability. Don't choose the average, choose Optimum. Optimum Financial Services Group is an authorized financial services provider. Welcome to the show today. It says that my microphone is muted, but I think that's an error message. I've got a very interesting guest today. One I'm excited to talk to you too. Daniel Perry was the co-pilot of that flight out of Cape Town where the engine fell right off the airplane. I know it sounds kind of hectic, but it was kind of hectic. He has since gone on to be an airline pilot for many years and currently employed as a pilot on the Boeing 747 cargo fleet at Nippon Cargo based in Japan. He was also a captain at British Airways Comair in South Africa, and I'm pleased to have him on the show. So stay with me. My name is Alex McPhail. This is High Performance Teams. Dan, how's it going today? Welcome.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me.
yeah, I like your virtual background there, but it is giving a bit of a shine around your head, showing you look like you could have been that the father on that TV show from the 90s, Third Rock from the Sun.
Yeah, there's a shine on my head. There's a shine on the head most days with my low drag haircut that I sport. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah,
low drag is good.
That's it. I would have to blue screen it out.
No problem. So Dan, this is going to be as live and fresh as it comes for me as well. We haven't had much chance to chat, but we know a lot of people in common. We cross over in lots of circles. We haven't actually met before. This is a virtual meeting. But if we can, just to start, I want to dive right into the conversation. But just as a bit of an interlude, maybe you can just give us a sense of where were you in your career. There's a lot of pilots that are watching and aviation enthusiasts. When this incident out of Cape Town happened, just give us a sense of your experience, your level of training, your level of knowledge, high-performance aircraft, jet aircraft, low time, etc. Maybe just paint that picture for a moment, please.
Sure, yeah. I started flying quite young. I was 16. I started flying gliders out at Magaliesburg, out west inside of Joburg, Orient Airfield. And got my PPL only at the age of 21. And did 2.5 years of contract flying Dornier 228 turboprops. And the company I was with sold the Dornier 228 and got a 737. And they were in the midst of converting the fleet, etc., and the deal kind of went south. So I'd finished my rating at Comair through the external training department, and I was kind of sitting with a rating and no job. So I went to Zambian Airways for 2 months and left because it was dodgy. Little did I know. So, and on the day at Nationwide, I think I had 1,007 hours total time.
Wow.
And I had been with Nationwide for approximately about 2 weeks' time. I'd been out of the sim for 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay, so you'd finished your training, you're on the line, and is it now line training, or did you finish the line training as well?
I'd finished the line training. Because I was already rated, they abridged the line training. I did a few less sectors than I would have had to should I have done an ab initio course.
Okay, cool. All right. While we talk, okay, let's just unpack that just for those who are not completely familiar with the idea of 1,007 hours. 1,000 sounds like a big number, but to give you a sense, you don't even qualify for an airline license yet at 1,007 hours. So give me a sense of what you feel like looking back on when you had 1,000 hours versus today. I presume you must have somewhere around 8,000 or 10,000 now?
Yeah, I'm sitting just shy of 9,000 hours at the moment.
Okay, so what does a 1,007-hour pilot feel like going to work on a jet that they've been flying for 2 weeks?
Have you ever watched your dog watch TV? Pretty much like that, yeah. Like a dog watching TV, or as one of my sim instructors said, like a monkey in a Sputnik.
Yeah.
There's lots happening, and the airplane is, quite far ahead of you. So not too much RAM that's available to process these process these things.
Okay, all right. So I think we painted the picture nicely, but just to round it all off before we dive into the day. 1,000 hours, you have another 500 odd hours to go before you're eligible for an ATP, the airline pilot license. That is now, in that stage of your career, it can take you anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to get that extra 500 hours. So you may have been flying for somewhere around 2, 3, 4 years before you even get to 1,000. However, it's not, it's bedrock basic training. It's not established real sort of hard of heart, experienced type of driver. So coming out of 2 weeks of training, you're now on the line, and this is a 737-200, is that right? The basic, advanced?
The advanced, yeah.
Okay, so you had the nice autopilots and things, but very old instrumentation, etc. Okay, and you were Joburg based, Cape Town based? Is this a second leg for the day?
I was Joburg based. I'd been seconded to Cape Town. That was the only way I could get the job. Kind of scratching for jobs back then, and so I'd been seconded to Cape Town. I had done 1 or 2 days duty, and I actually swapped the flight out. A friend of mine who I'd flown contract with phoned me up, and he had something to do in the afternoon, and there was a morning Cape Town Joburg, Cape Town return flight, and an afternoon Cape Town Joburg return flight. And he asked me if could I do the afternoon one. So I actually swapped the flight out to them. And I think Paul's watching at the time, and at the moment.
Welcome,
Paul. Glad that he did. Yeah.
Okay, so you started in Cape Town, and this was the first leg then.
Yes, it was the first leg of the day. It was the first time flying with this particular captain, Trevor Arnold.
Okay.
And met him at ops. He was a hell of a nice guy, and he actually said to me, "Look, you're new to the company. It's the first time we've flown together. Would you mind if I did the flying and he watched, and then we could set the tone from the day from there?" So that's how I came about to be pilot flying for that sector.
Okay, right. And just to explain a bit more detail there. So if you are new, it's quite a common approach that a captain will give the first officer that they haven't flown with the opportunity to fly, because it gives you a bit of a free up your thinking, take a bigger management approach to the cockpit and the flight, but also to assess, where is this person? Where are we together? Is he highly skilled? Is he moderately skilled? Is there something we need to watch for? So it's quite common and a sensible approach, I would say.
No, definitely. Trevor, as he proved to be that day, is the master of management. Kind of like juggling dinner plates, burning dinner plates all at once. And his style was definitely that of, you are a qualified pilot, you've passed all the company checks, so there's no reason why you shouldn't fly. And as we talked about earlier, that some of that RAM, just rather free that RAM up for decision making should the need arrive.
Yeah, okay. So then also let's just paint the scene. This is a decade more ago. It is a time where the social media, etc., isn't what it is today, and the message, although it was all over the newspapers and things, certainly an incident like that today would make you almost world famous, and maybe it didn't make you world famous out of this, but a lot of people know your name. And the fact that we're talking and you were the co-pilot on the flight is just, we have mutual friends, and somebody said, "Hey, I think you should have a conversation with Dan. I think it'll be interesting." And so there's no ill feelings towards anyone else that was involved in the flight. In fact, we'll be celebrating all the discussions and the decisions. But Trevor obviously played a big part, as you said, juggling burning plates. But you were the person flying, and we're having this conversation. So let's hit it. It's a normal preparation departure. What's the weather like in Cape Town?
The weather was quite bad. It was a crosswind departure, wet runway, low visibility, above the takeoff minimum, obviously. I think about 400 meters vis.
Okay.
Driving rain, that Cape Town sort of frontal rain that comes in
waves.
We had, it was a max thrust takeoff, the L73-200s. We couldn't do assumed thrust or flex thrust, I think they call it in the Airbus, with a wet runway.
Okay.
And so, it was quite a busy departure. We had quite a lot of fuel. Back then, we didn't have the fuel management that we have now in terms of loading the minimums, maybe using a parallel runway as an alternate, etc. So we had 10,000 kilograms on board, which in a 737-200 is full wings plus another 2,000 in the belly.
That's it. 86 was full wings, or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I also flew the 737-200 on the cargo fleet. Okay, so did you have a takeoff a piece of paper, that takeoff card, the toll card?
Yeah, that little yellow toll card. I still got it actually in a box somewhere.
Oh,
I
nice
pinched it
souvenir. Maybe you should frame
on
it.
the back. Yeah, I should hang it in a pub. I don't spend much time in pubs. Those who know me will testify that to me. I also don't tell the truth that often.
Okay. So Dan, so you
But,
say,
yeah.
look, on any given flight airplane on that day with that weather and those conditions, heavy fuel, wet, driving rain coming through, it's a busy day. So just to set the scene once again, regardless of what happens next, this is busy anyway.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Low levels of automation in the 737-200. Things like anti-ice to consider, cross-checking calculations for takeoff thrust because there's no computer to set them for you. So yeah, busy day at the office. And for Trevor, just keeping an eye on this new guy that probably doesn't know what he's doing. So
Well,
just double checking all the stuff that I did. So a double load on him.
sure. And in your defense, it is a good time, although you don't have the experience and maybe your swing isn't grooved in terms of what else happens out there. It's a very good time that you're recently out of the sim because you've done lots of non-normals and lots of sort of non-routine things. So, practicing engine failure after takeoff, practicing single engine landing, practicing a few different things that you don't see routinely on the line. But
Correct.
you are almost slicker than the person that was 6 months ago in the sim from that point of view.
Yeah, definitely. From one of the lessons I took away from this day is if you don't have the experience, you damn sure better have the training. And I was blessed in terms of being trained at Comair by current Comair instructors, ex-SAA guys that were freelancing there, and then arriving at Nationwide where the likes of the late Laurie Kay trained me, did some of my simulator, etc. So the wealth of knowledge that was imparted on me with 1,000 odd hours was quite something.
Okay.
So the training was really good, and it definitely carried the day that day.
Okay, so if there's driving rain and frontal weather coming in out of Cape Town, presume you're getting airborne out of 01 with low cloud and weather and rain and wet runway full thrust. So you're bundling along the takeoff on the runway now. You've set your takeoff thrust and you are keeping it straight.
Yeah, bumbling along the runway, and V1 call came quite early because of the wet runway, and then on rotation, the next call is positive rate, and that's when the altimeter starts moving, that the aircraft's actually climbing. And the next call is gear up, and the captain actually had his hand on the gear lever and was moving it to the up position when all hell broke loose. It was like a multiple sound. It wasn't just one sound. It was like a bang and a tear and a crash, kind of all at once.
Okay.
And the number 2 thrust lever literally snapped back to the idle position. But I mean, if my hand had been there, it probably would have taken a finger off. It came back so fast.
Oh wow! What is that? A mechanical linkage that did that? Or?
Yeah, it was the linkage pulling out and stretching, and on its way out.
So you didn't have to guess which engine it was.
Well, I'll get to that. Yeah, we actually did.
Okay.
Because there was kind of contraindications. We had a reverse light come on, which is also all part and
Hydraulics,
parcel of all the linkages and sensors, etc., being ripped out of the sockets. So we initially thought a reverse bucket, the old 737 didn't have a translating sleeve for those who it had like a bucket that opened up on the back of on the engine. We thought one of those was deployed because it had happened before in the past.
Okay.
And when the aircraft rolled, it rolled quite violently, but it rolled into the live engine, which is strange.
Yeah. Okay. So just to paint the scene there. So firstly, you said the captain was just busy raising the gear. That is like moments after liftoff. So it is as almost as critical as you get in terms of the flyability now. You just airborne when this happens. And secondly, this idea of if you're not familiar with multi-engine thrust for the listeners, you can imagine if you got your two either side of the aircraft producing thrust and one stops, then the one that is producing thrust will, it'll provide more. But now you're saying it was the opposite way. So that must be a very strange feeling indeed.
Yeah, it was a very strange feeling indeed. And the roll rate was quite severe, where in piston or straight-winged aircraft, you would catch the yaw with your feet, with the rudder, whereas in a swept-wing jet, you catch it with aileron.
Mm-hmm.
So I caught it with aileron, and I think it was just the moment and the inertia in the wing, where it didn't really stop it. It slowed it down. So I actually used a bit of rudder to bring the wing up that had dropped.
Sure.
So there was a little bit of confusion when we got to the identify phase of the failure, of what had actually happened, because all the indications on the dashboard said that we had lost the number 2 engine. Sure. But with the roll in the wrong direction, we kind of had to stop and think and discuss. And we were worried about a situation similar to Kegworth in the UK, where a 737-400, they got some abnormal vibrations and shut down the wrong engine.
Sure.
Because the engine had idle. So we kind of wanted to avoid that situation. So there was a couple of seconds of troubleshooting before we went through the memory items of securing that failed engine.
Okay, so just to put it into sequence again, so you rotated, gear up, bang, rupture, noise, all sorts of funny things, and you just keep this thing flying, and now you're climbing, and you're in the cloud already. It's around 400 feet, and now you're discussing, well, which side is it? And you're giving your input. It feels like this. The instruments and the captain is seeing that it's the opposite of what you're feeling. That's a confusing moment right there. And you're in cloud. You can't see outside.
Yeah, so there were a lot of inputs there that were false inputs that we had to sift through. And that's where Trevor was fantastic. Trevor just said, look, it's going in a straight line. We're heading away from terrain. Let's just discuss what we've got here. Okay. And he was very, very cool, calm, collected. I cannot speak highly enough of him.
Okay, right. That's great to hear. And it's comforting for you at the time, knowing that you're feeling secure in the person that you're next to in the cockpit, sharing this cockpit with. This is an unprecedented event. But I just want to make sure that people are understanding that. So you are in the cloud. It's just white. All you see out your windows is white. Some instruments are giving you indications that something is wrong on the one side of the airplane, and what you're feeling is that something is wrong on the other side of the airplane. But you can't see outside to verify this. All you know as the pilot flying is that you are feeling something and the instruments are telling you something else. So how do you reconcile a white windscreen with no maps and no picture of where you are and a feeling versus what you see? How do you build this picture, bearing in mind that you're now doing probably 200 knots, 300-400 k's an hour by then, and you're just thundering along? What's happening physically? You're passing 500 feet, 600 feet. What's happening?
Well, rule one, I think, is always trust your instruments in IF flying. And Donnie Potgieter, from ex-SAA guy who instructed me on 737, always said there's a big gyroscope that size, and it'll always point to the sky. So do whatever you have to do to keep the gyroscope pointing towards the sky. So his words definitely were in the forefront of my thought patterns. And I just kept the wings level. How I was doing it, honestly was a secondary consideration. I knew the wings were level, and then I could slowly work out, okay, what inputs am I doing to keep them level? If I do this, the aircraft will do that. And how does that reconcile against what you know about aerodynamics? And then Trevor, as part of the troubleshooting, bearing in mind this all happened in seconds, this isn't...
So we had minute 19.
Yeah.
We're at minute 19, but we're still talking about the first 60 odd seconds.
Correct. Yeah. And Trevor actually leaned forward and he grabbed the number 1 thrust lever, which is our live operative engine, and he moved it back just a centimeter. Mm-hmm. And the noise changed, the pitch changed, the roll changed, everything kind of changed, and then we knew, okay, that was where we were. This is the good engine, this is the bad engine, and what do we do from here? Why it was doing that was a secondary consideration. This is what it's doing, and you kind of have to just go with that. It's doing that. Who cares why it's doing that? Let's just fly it out.
Okay, so now you get through this first bit. You've identified as the first one. Are you in cloud the whole time, or do you eventually top out above it?
We were in cloud the whole time. We climbed to 3,000 feet and intercepted a radial. I think it was 353 in those days, outbound Charlie Tango Victor to go around Tigerberg, and we were heading out towards Robben Island, which was the engine failure after takeoff procedure. And we did Boeing has what they used to call memory items or recall items that you go through and to secure the engine. One of them is disconnecting the auto throttle, reducing the thrust or closing the thrust lever after identifying it on the inoperative engine, and then shutting down the fuel cutoff switch, and then pulling the fire handle. Once we've done that, that's followed by the checklist. And so we completed the checklist. We were heading out. We were in cloud. And once we completed the checklist, we did the after takeoff checklist. And then Trevor said, okay, let's just assess how we are. Is the flight pattern under control? Are we heading the right way? Are we heading towards terrain? Mm-hmm. Are we where we want to be in the sky? And that's when he said to me, he said, Dan, you're not trimming this aircraft properly. And this was like shadows of the sim, because in the sim with my trainings before, I'd gone online. During one of the engine failure things, I had not trimmed the aircraft properly. The 737-200 had a big round, like old rotary telephone dial.
I remember,
screw with your hand, and you get cramped in your wrists and all sorts of stuff. And I'd been lazy with that thing. And so Trevor said to me, you're not trimming. So I immediately thought I wasn't trimming. And it came about afterwards that I thought I was trimming correctly. Mm-hmm. And Trevor said, let me just take it for 10 seconds and see what the aircraft's doing. And he took the aircraft and he felt it and he played with the trim and he gave it back and he said, I don't know what this thing's doing.
Oh, shit.
He said, you just do what you're doing and keep doing that.
Just keep doing it.
That was literally what happened. Yeah. So,
well, in some respects, you feel vindicated for giving your best effort, but in other respects, you realize that you're now the last line of defense here because you're giving it the best go between the two of you. It must be, this is now on you.
Correct. Yeah. I just remember saying to myself, "Look, this is not the simulator. This is for all the marbles now." So,
and it becomes. And I'm going to keep stressing it throughout our conversation. Your windows are white. I don't know if you're not an airline pilot or a significant pilot. When you see 40 centimeters in front of you, it's just white. It doesn't. Sometimes it can feel just like the simulator. You don't have that same appreciation, particularly today. You take out your smartphone. How do I get to the shops? Put on Google Maps. There's the moving map display. You didn't have that. That's not the technology we're talking about.
No, it was full what we call steam-driven stuff. Yeah. Sure. BRTs, big round things. That's kind of the extent of the instrumentation. But saying that, you're having just only trained on that, coming from the Dornier to the 200. That's all you're used to, and you built up a mental situational awareness of exactly what the aircraft's doing based on those gauges. If I had to go do it now, I think it would be.
Yeah, I think a different thing. But I mean, at the time when you're doing 3-4 sectors a day, 4 or 5 days a week, it becomes what you do. And you were, but just to paint the picture of how real it was. Okay, so he's handed it back to you, and now where are you, about 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet, setting up to.
Climbing up to 3,000 where we leveled off, and then Trevor sat back and he said, "Okay, let's just assess what we've got here. We know we've had an engine failure, a severe damage as we thought it was in terms of the Boeing parlance. And then we looked at there was a fuel leak. The fuel was rapidly draining out of that wing, and that would explain the change in trim the whole time.
Yeah.
So we did the fuel leak checklist, which didn't help because the valve that does all the shutting off of fuel was, as you can see from that picture, that's the engine strut, where it actually broke off. All the valves and the check valves, etc., were lying in the bush with the engine, so they couldn't help us.
Okay, so just pause here a sec. So here is your where it connects to under the wing, and we'll get another picture shortly, but this should be an engine here connected to this creamy colored, but it's snapped off completely. All those wires and cables, hydraulic fuel, everything just ruptured completely. You can see some loose pieces towards the back there just dangling, and this will give you a sense of the kind of it's essentially like ripping your gearbox out of your car or your engine out your car, and everything that's associated, whether it's heating and cooling, if it's fuel, if it's oil, if it's everything, it's just all gone instantly.
Correct, yeah. Every single, and hence the thrust lever coming back, etc., with the flex cable being ripped off, and the uncontrolled fuel leak was just pouring out of and the jet pumps were still on, and it was just pouring out of the wing with no valves to stop it.
Yeah. Now, also, so to just also unpack the story of a modern aircraft, the two engines are really, they're driving the thrust, but they're also driving the heating. They're driving everything. So that's the power plant for the electrics, for the fuel, for the heating. It is, and there will be backups, etc. The other engine can carry a lot of it, but it's a major deficit not only for the thrust and the aerodynamics, but the systems on board too. And as you explained, so you end up with a fuel leak. Okay, so you're talking about the fuel leak now, and you start getting out the fuel leak checklist and how to rectify this situation. I'll just leave the picture up a bit longer so you can carry on.
Yeah, and with regard, for those who don't fly airliners, there are so many systems, so many complex systems that you can't remember every single step. That, for example, with a fuel leak, of which valves to close, which selectors to select, etc., etc. So we work with checklists, and they're a read and action type of checklist where you read something and then action it. Instead of a normal checklist like a before takeoff checklist where you action it and then read the checklist afterwards to check that what you've done is correct. So we went through the steps of the on the QRH, the quick reference handbook that Boeing has in each cockpit, and step by step went through the fuel leak checklist, which didn't help us. We'd done the checklist and we still had the fuel leak. What eventually happens is that the aircraft just feeds a tank to engine. So the good engine was just feeding off the good tank. If it had tried to feed off the other tank, they would have just sucked air in it, and probably had some issues with that. But luckily, the checklist got out the way, and we secured it as only we could, doing with what little resources we had in the cockpit. And then Trevor, in part of his risk assessment, looked again, and he said, he said to me, sorry, I'm just trying to think back the exact words, but it was something to do with the fact of the controllability of the aircraft. I said to him, Trevor, I'm having a really hard time flying this airplane.
This is after the point where he'd taken over, tried it, and gave back.
Yeah. This is now, call it 5 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm having a really hard time flying this aircraft, and he gave it another feel. He said, "I've got it," and he said, "Just rest your hands." He felt it, and then he gave it back to me, and the controls started getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And what was happening was in the 200, there's two hydraulic systems. Hydraulic systems are, for those who don't fly aircraft with hydraulics, it's like power steering in a car.
Sure.
And the A system, the primary system, is controlled by the engine-driven pump, so it's an engine-driven system. And when we lost that engine, we lost that system, but it's got a backup. It's got the B system, which were electrical pumps located in the number 2 fuel tank. The only thing is they need 760 kilograms of fuel to keep them submerged, to keep the heat exchangers submerged, to cool the electrical pumps. And with that fuel draining out of the tank, the hydraulics started giving in, and we went to what's called a manual reversion state, which is where you have no hydraulic assistance. So you're driving a 53-ton jet by moving cables and push rods, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I've only tried that in the simulator a few times, or quite a few times over the years, but it's a significant load. It's not, you have to have your wits about you in your anticipation, but also you got to be strong enough to actually maneuver that airplane around in flight. 50 tons of airplane. And the faster you go, the harder it gets, etc. Yeah. So exactly, give us a sense of the kind of strain that you're going under now. I mean, quite literally, you're saying take a break, rest, and give it another go.
Give it another go, yeah. And so it's quite a thing. Look, when you've got a couple of liters of adrenaline going through your body, it gets easier. I recently tried it in the sim. One of my IF renewals, the DE said to me, "Come, let's give it a go." Okay. And it was hard. Yeah, it was a lot harder than I remember it. Yeah. But I'm also a lot less sporting than I used to be at age of 24.
Sure. Okay, all right. So now he sees it, he realizes. So now you both realize there must be a hydraulic issue. Yeah, it's now back to manual reversion. Okay, and you're still heading towards Robben Island now?
No, we've gone around Robben Island. I think we just turned right-hand downwind 01 under radar vectors. We're 3,000 feet in the cloud. We accomplished the manual reversion checklist. So we secured the aircraft, the hydraulic system, and put the standby system on, which only powers the rudder, the 7.3. So we'd finished that checklist, and then Trevor said to me, we had another chat about this. What have we got? What do we don't have? Where are we? Etc. Etc. And his exact words were, "We're in a lot of trouble here. We're in very big trouble."
And this is not a passing statement. This is him really feeling worried.
It wasn't said in a high-pitched voice. It wasn't said he said it matter-of-factly, like the sky is blue. He said, "We're in big trouble here." And we kind of chatted about what kind of approach we're going to do, and will we be ready for the approach when we got to that stage of the game.
Yeah.
And then he called the cabin crew forward, and her name was Marilyn Rink, I think at least 25-year veteran of SAA, so highly trained and very experienced cabin crew member. We called her forward, and we said, "Marilyn, could you please go and look out of the windows and tell us what you see?" Now, Trevor was very clever in structuring the question like that, because he didn't lead her on saying, "Go look at the engine on the right-hand side," for example, or an aircraft right-hand side. He just said, "Go look out the windows." And she came back and she said, "On the aircraft right-hand side, I cannot see the front of the engine."
Okay.
That's all she said. That we had a full house, 737-200, a small aircraft, so she battled to lean over all the people in the rows and get a good view. And with that, we kind of knew that we had definitely the number 2 engine was the problem child, and there was something structural wrong with it, not just internal.
Okay, I just want to pause there for a moment. So, folks, you can bring your questions. I'm going to carry on, but if there's something that stands out, you're welcome. But the reason for bringing in the cabin crew, not just to get that answer, but also the cabin crew is part of the crew.
Yes.
Sometimes passengers get the sense that they're there just to make sure you're wearing your seatbelt or to serve you tea. Not the case. They're an integral part of the crew. They're safety officers, but they also share information, everything that's happening behind the cockpit door. And so that's a structured, formalized process to brief the senior cabin crew member. And this was him gathering facts from her before telling her then what's coming next. So, okay, carry on there. Thanks.
Correct, yeah. And the cabin crew were phenomenal. We had 4 cabin crew on board who were just absolutely phenomenal. Without them, we would have had a riot in the back there. People were panicking. People were screaming. People didn't know people trying to get out of their seats.
Okay. Could the passengers notice that the engine had gone missing?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There was subsequently in the media there were quite a few passengers that said they actually saw it happen. Them guys sitting on the wing, etc., saw it happen. So yeah, there was a lot of panic in the back, and those cabin crew and the Maryland just were phenomenal. I cannot praise them highly enough, and without them, definitely maybe a much different outcome, especially when we got to the evacuation phase on the ground, which we'll
get
talk
to
about later.
Okay. All right, so you're sort of beetling downwind now, and he says, "Look, we've got major trouble." She says she can't see the front of the engine.
Correct, yeah. So we briefed her. We said, "Look, we are returning to Cape Town. It was a quick briefing. You've got 15 minutes to prepare the cabin. It'll be a normal landing with a brace command, but we don't expect any structural damage or any kind of crash, if you want a better word, on arrival. And please go and secure the cabin. And if you see anything else, come and chat to us. But we are quite busy." And she summed it up, repeated the briefing to us, and closed the door and went back and proceeded to secure the cabin. At this stage, we had gotten the weather at Cape Town. We could not go to our takeoff alternate. The 737-200 has got leading edge devices that when you have an hydraulic failure, they cannot retract. So they limit your airspeed to 220 knots.
Okay.
So we didn't have the fuel to get to George, which is our nominated takeoff alternate that morning. So we were committed to Cape Town. We were going to have to do a manual gear extension, so we didn't know if we had enough thrust to go around with the gear down with that with the structural conditions. We didn't know what had happened to the flaps. If we deployed the flaps, what was going to happen? If there was any kind of damage. So a bit unknown at the moment, but we briefed worst case, and we flew it to the best case, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Try
to
to
me.
keep it as normal as possible, but preparing for the worst.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just to sort of dig in a bit there, manual gear extension, quite literally, you pumping this thing down. It takes a lot longer, but also the implications are you don't bring it back up. And the go around scenario is if you come in and land, bearing in mind the bad weather that we had in Cape Town, if you can't see the runway, do you have enough thrust to go on? Firstly, secondly, do you have the controllability? Thirdly, if you can't get the gear up, you can't get rid of the drag. This is a big problem. So, this takeoff alternate is there to safeguard you against this exact scenario where the weather's bad, it's closed in, you can't get in easily, you want a bit more of a clear, calm place to get in. Now you don't have that either. So pretty much you're getting painted into a corner here.
Yeah, definitely. And another one of the issues was constantly talking to Fani, the air traffic controller, who I'll tell you about now, who just did the most incredible job. They were battling to get the debris off the runway. When we spoke to the tower and told them that we had an issue, they reported that they'd seen smoke, which was the fuel. Afterwards, we've since uncovered it was actually the fuel leaking from the aircraft. And he said there is debris falling off your aircraft. Bearing in mind, he couldn't see the runway either because of the visibility. So AXA had their crews out and they were pushing the scrap metal off the runway, and the ICAO recommendations for an open runway is that I think it's 47 meters off each, or 45 meters from centerline has to be clear of all debris. And basically, we just said to them, just push it off the tar and into the grass. If it's off the tar, we're happy to take the landing, because they couldn't guarantee a clear runway or a sterile runway.
What was the bits that was it? Just why couldn't they clear it? What was the?
Well, the engine weighs 2 tons.
Oh, so there was very big, heavy pieces still stuck on the
bits
runway.
Of steel there, yeah, and they had to get brooms and little bits of metal. I mean, a little bit of metal that size brought down the Concorde. So
yeah, sure.
They had to get all that off the runway, and they did a hell of a job. We were in the air for 28 minutes, and they got this.
Sure.
They got it done in 28 minutes. On downwind, while we were discussing all of this, and the old adage of aviate, navigate, communicate came up. And we were aviating, and kind of that's all that was happening. And we were probably task saturated with all that was going on. 3 different checklists and the cabin crew, and preparing for an approach which we knew was outside of our limitations. When ATC called us, Nationwide 73, I said stand by. I said Nationwide 73, gave them a standby again. They called us a third time. And I said, stand by, but quite forcefully.
Yeah.
And finally the controller said, turn right heading XYZ, terrain is now
sure,
in front of you. And we were heading straight for Cape Hunclip. We were on downwind, fat, dumb and happy, just heading straight for Cape Hunclip, keeping the airplane in a straight line. So we weren't navigating, and we definitely weren't communicating with the tower. And
understandably so, it's task saturation.
Yeah, we were, and it shows you that, just when you think that you've got it all under control, you actually don't. Always double check where you are and what you're doing.
But also that I like that sort of reassurance from the controller, from Fani. He knew at some point to just chip in, even though you're saying stand by because this is major. He just gave you the info you needed, and he didn't need a conversation about it. All he had to just tell you is turn right heading 210 or whatever it was.
Correct.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so we turned away from the terrain out over False Bay, and then Trevor, we got the weather. The wind was 320, 21 knots. The limit crossed the limitation for a 737.
17 knots wet, wasn't it? 17 knots?
On manual reversion, single engine, it's 10 knots.
10 knots, yeah.
Yeah, so 17 on a normal groove runway, but 10 knots with manual reversion. So that was out of limitations. The visibility was 400 meters. You need 550 meters to land on the Cat 1 approach. So, we weren't even Cat 2 approved. But we had no options. So Trevor said, look, we've got a bit of fuel. We can hang around. But we've got to begin this approach at some stage. We can't just orbit here all day. So we briefed, and part of the briefing was that if at 200 foot we don't see the runway, we are going to continue. And if and when the aircraft says 10 feet, there's a radar altimeter that calls out 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. I'm going to close the thrust and flare, and we're going to hit the runway. probably, and nobody's going to die. It's going to be a hard landing, but nobody's going to die. Because that's kind of the option. There was no go around briefed.
Sure.
It wasn't going to happen.
So what would normally be at 200 feet if you don't see the runway, we're going to go around, take thrust and try again. But now you're briefing that we're not going around. This is the approach. We're committed.
Correct. Yeah. We are now fully committed to this. I can't remember the fuel we had on landing, but it wasn't enough for the gear down, etc. To I don't think to sustain us for too much, too many go arounds, and definitely couldn't get to George with it.
Sure.
So committed, and with that crosswind, and like a good first officer, he took us through took us in a right-hand approach, and then took us through the localizer, and then paralleled us to the runway, and then turned us back on a very shallow intercept, with the wind pushing us onto the localizer. Because when we got a word in with him, he asked us, what are our conditions? And we said to him, we are having difficulty controlling the aircraft.
Okay.
And he didn't say a word. He didn't make a hullabaloo about it. But he adjusted his radar vectors so that we wouldn't have to make big control inputs.
That's amazing.
Which is it's superior controlling.
Sure.
I don't know anywhere else in the world where you would get a controller thinking on his feet like that.
Just curious, has Fani got any GCA ground control approach experience from the Air Force style?
I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm very, very ashamed of this, but I have never actually gone and bought the guy a beer and said thank you.
Well, now we've got it on record. The whole world knows that you're going to go buy him a beer.
I'm going to hunt him down and when we're allowed to buy a beer, I'll buy him one.
Cool, but it must be nice, and the value of the controller, you can, as the pilot flying in difficult conditions, even just normal difficult bad weather conditions, the calmness of their voice, the presence, you really feel it. I mean, from my experience in the Air Force with the ground control approach, they talk you through every heading and altitude, speed change. They give you the smallest input. Effectively, they're flying the instrument landing for you, telling you exactly what to do. And that calmness and reassurance of how they talk to you makes all the difference. And it sounds that's what Fani did for you.
Correct, yeah. And that's what a high-performance team is. It's every member of that team. It's not just the meathead pushing the ailerons around and pulling back on the elevators. It's the whole team.
Sure.
I think the pilots were a little part of it, and the team started with the training department at PPL level and at Commie level, and at SAA and nationwide, and at ATNS or the Air Force, wherever he learned his trade.
Yeah. Okay, so now he's giving you the sort of patter down. And do you break cloud at some point, or does it get quite hairy at the end?
No, we were in clag the whole time, and like a good FO, the glide slope wasn't an issue. The glide slope the aircraft was clean with that wing being so clean, with having no drag on it. The glide slope, there's plenty of power available. Okay. Versus power required to maintain the glide slope, but the localizer was an issue. I had it surrounded for most of.
You had it covered from all angles.
I definitely had it surrounded. Yeah. When we got to 200 feet,
still a manual reversion, flying a very heavy 50-ton airplane.
Yeah, and we got to 200 feet, couldn't see the runway, and Trevor just hit continue. We just about crossed over the N2 at that stage when we broke cloud, actually broke rain. It was actually rain.
Okay.
And we could see for miles. We could see Robben Island. It was that squall had moved through, and it was just the most beautiful, beautiful sight. The runway sort of glistening in that afternoon sunlight on 01 there, and like a good little FO, I'd lined us up on the edge lights at 100 foot. And Trevor took the controls in the book. In this instance, says that the captain should do the landing.
Sure.
Those procedures. And he took control, and at 100 foot, you would just make a small little adjustment like that, and nothing happened.
Sure.
Because of the manual version. There's a little dead spot, whatever. He said there was quite a strong expletive that came out of his mouth here, that the younger audience probably haven't heard yet. And that came out, and he what looked like went to full controls, rolled the aircraft over, rolled it back, and put it down on the center line, which is probably the smoothest landing I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, it's amazing.
And Then he had the presence of mind to roll off onto the cross runway onto 16 because he didn't want to block the runway for the other guys who were orbiting.
Yeah, because by this stage there's some traffic in the air and they've cleared it all out and given you full ATC, full runway.
Correct.
Everyone must just wait now.
Yeah, we were the only show in town, so to speak. We had our own frequency, etc. And Trevor, Master Eamon, just said, "We'll tell them we'll roll off onto runway 16 because we were on accumulator pressure for the brakes, so we only had 3 applications of brakes. So he let it coast, turned it off, and stopped it on the cross runway, clear of the active runway, so that there was space behind us for guys to land who may have been low on fuel." But the whole time that he was managing the situation, it came up a few times where he was thinking about other people other than us in terms of when we worked out that we didn't have an engine, the first thing he said was, "I hope it didn't fall on somebody's house."
Yeah, well, that's some
and
of the
I hope
comments
the people on the ground are okay.
Oh, it's amazing. The presence of mind there.
His presence of mind was unbelievable. If he could write a book on how to be a captain, it would probably do a lot of people a lot of good.
Okay, and I believe he's now flying in the States. Is that right?
I lost touch with Trevor. The last time I saw Trevor was 3 years ago. He was flying for Mango at the time.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't spoken to him since. You would think that you have a situation like this, kind of be bragging at each other's house every Friday. But
well, you certainly have a bond.
Definitely. He's definitely someone I look up to and respect, and definitely like to emulate one day. On the ground, it doesn't stop when you park the brake. We did have 106 passengers on board. They were all, I'd say 80% of them were elderly German passengers on a tour group. There was it was raining. We had a wet runway, and the cabin crew told the cabin to remain seated. And he said, "Dan, I'm going to go and assess the conditions." So that is us when we'd stopped, or probably just after looking at the crash barriers that they put up there.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of weather that it was. That's the conditions that were out there. And he said, "Dan, I'm going to go and assess the cabin and decide whether to evacuate or just do a rapid deplanement." Rapid deplanement is when they get those stairs that you're used to at the airport, and they put them up, and everybody gets off via the stairs in an orderly fashion, leaving behind their cabin baggage, etc. There is a bit of equipment. It's actually a fire truck that has a staircase on the back that they just drive up to and park it on the side of the aircraft. He said to me, if there's any indication of fire, either from one of the onboard sensors or from the fire trucks who were talking to us on frequency, if there are any indications of fire, just order the evacuation from there. Don't hesitate.
Okay.
So I sat there in the cockpit chatting to the fire tender on the radio and kind of assessing, doing my own assessments. And he stuck his head back in the cockpit, and his face was the color of his shirt, which is a nice bleached white. And he said, "There's no bloody engine on that wing."
Sure.
And the 737's got a cockpit window that actually opens. Yeah. And I opened the window, stuck my head out. I said, "You're right. There's nothing on that wing."
And it's quite a big engine. It's not very wide. It's the old school low bypass. Is it JT8D? But it's long. It's like the cigar. It covers about up to a meter in front and a meter behind the wing. It's a long. For that whole thing to just disappear, it must be a scary thing. For this, you look out and there's nothing there.
Correct, yeah. And you see all the wires hanging off, and the ding and the leading edge devices, etc., etc. It was a little bit. I was definitely shaken up by that.
Sure. Yeah. Amazing. Like it's an incredible story. So many different things and all the interplay. But I want to ask you maybe some specific, and folks, you can bring your questions. People are asking where you're flying now. Are you a captain still now, or have you now joined a seniority list again?
I'm a first officer. I've only been there 3 years. After Nationwide, I left. I resigned the next morning.
Really?
Yes, yeah. I wasn't prepared to fly those aircraft anymore.
Okay. Based on maintenance, etc.
Based on maintenance and the attitude of the owner of the airline to us afterwards.
Okay. Well, we won't get into detail about the sort of the individual, but I know that this, I think yours was the 4th incident of an engine falling off around the world of a 737. effectively it was something to do with shear bolts. But anyway,
Yes,
so
yeah.
what
The
did
shear bolts, as you can see by that picture, if you put it up again, the cone bolts are
this one?
that one. You can see as you look at it on the left-hand side, but it's actually the right-hand side of the aircraft. The bolt is still there. If you look at the other side, the cradle itself is broken off. And that, if you look at the CIA report, was due to metal fatigue, due to the engine being put on incorrectly in its services. And they're supposed to, when you put an engine back on, you're supposed to do a non-destructive test, which is effectively a kind of X-ray, or sonogram even, to look for cracks in metal that you can't see with the naked eye. And I believe they had a hard time producing the reports of those tests that they were supposed to have done. Yeah.
All right, so you resigned the next morning, and
Yes.
and now you not only recovering from this stressful situation, you're unemployed.
Yeah, being unemployed was secondary, I think, at the time. I remember the phone call. I phoned my dad, and I said to him, "Dad, I'm resigning." And he said, "Why?" I said, I'm not happy to fly those aircraft. I don't trust them." And he said, pretty much, "You don't get in an aircraft that you don't trust." And I phoned up. I phoned up Comair where I'd done my training. I figured, well, I spent a bit of money with them, so maybe they'll remember me. And I chatted to Glenn Warden, who then referred me to Martin Lowe, and who was the director of flight ops at the time, and Johan Visser, director of training, who had actually done my base training.
Okay.
Because I'd never flown a jet before, I actually had to once I finished my simulator, I had to take the jet to Bloemfontein and go do circuits at Bloemfontein. And Johan was the instructor, so he knew my face, and I gave him a ring, and he said, "Come and have coffee with me."
Oh, nice.
And I went and spoke to him, and long story short, I was employed shortly afterwards by Comair, and I was there for 9 years.
Okay, so you got your command at Comair.
You very kindly called me a captain. I wasn't. I did my command evaluation at Comair, and passed that, and the next day left for Japan.
Okay, all right. So
currently now.
Your career continues in another. So Fran was asking earlier if is this why you fly 4-engine aircraft now? People are asking. I see Putch has joined us. He wants to know something about a seal from the night before, but I think that might be a sneaky question, seeing as Putch put you up to this in the first place. And Griffin is saying that this is similar to that L1011. I mean the DC-10 flight 191 Sioux City, where there they had 273 fatalities. And you guys brought this back in bad weather and got it to land. I think in terms of the hydraulic failure, it was similar. Certainly they had more challenges in controlling because they didn't have the control lines directly on the controls. But it highlights the point that this was a major event.
Yeah, it was. I think the Sioux City guys lost their rudder. We had a rudder. And for those PPL students who are watching and the lower time guys, your secondary effector controls, ladies and gents, are critical to learn, because one day you're going to have, if you do have a jammed surface, there are ways around it by using the rudder or the ailerons if you've got no rudder, etc.
Sure.
Or power for pitch, etc. So it definitely was a digging into the memory banks and all the flying I'd done. I started flying gliders, and the gliding helped me a lot.
I'm sure.
Because in a glider, if you don't use your feet, you're going to skid all over the sky, and you're not going to be able to climb in your thermal. Your aircraft will be out of trim, and your drag is going to be too much to sustain a climb, and you're going to fall out the sky, as we call it. So the gliding helped. The tail drag experience I had helped. There were a lot of things that came in and helped, and that's why I urge low time guys, if you don't have the hours, fly as much as you can, and fly as many different things as you can. Fly tail draggers, fly aerobatics, fly gliders, fly a hot air balloon. You are going to learn different things in aviation which you can put in a toolbox, and one day reach into that toolbox and fidget around it and pull something out that kind of fits and make it work.
I think that's great advice. If you can't get your number of hours up, get your diversity of hours up. Then a tail dragger, I've also more than 1,000 hours on tail draggers. It's a whole different skill set which adds value somewhere. It does. It's a toolbox, as you say. And the gliding, another whole different thing. And it's interesting, there's another similarity between you and Sully Sullenberger with the gliding experience. Again, a super experienced glider pilot with a big toolbox. You didn't have such a big toolbox, but you had this diverse skill at the time. And it's been fascinating. People say it's like watching a live air crash investigators, this conversation. Certainly, I find it fascinating. Okay, so going to that sort of command phase and the later, now you're flying at a very big international airline with big airplanes flying all over the world. What kind of lessons have you taken out? What have you brought with you from there that you specifically use regularly, or you will use when you're in the left seat again?
It can and will happen to you. So always, plan for the worst. If you fly with a captain who seems pedantic, there's a good reason why he's pedantic. He's probably been bitten by something even small at some point in his career, and that's why he's doing it. I definitely am super careful, and if I find myself being rushed, often we pushed for schedule, etc., etc. In airlines, we're always chasing a schedule, more so with passengers than with cargo. But slow down. That 30 seconds extra it's going to take you is not going to affect your on-time performance.
It reminds
Rather make sure it's done right, properly, first time.
A friend of mine, Patrick, says if you're rushing to fly, you're rushing to die. That's a good way of putting it. Thanks, Dan. So have you brought in some pedantic things? Have you noticed you're more pedantic about something? Is it the sort of rushing factor that's the biggest change?
Yes, and I'm pedantic on the takeoff briefing now, with the rejected takeoff briefing, the after takeoff, if we have an engine failure after V1 segment of the briefing, and I'm also quite pedantic with when guys say, okay, if we have an engine failure, we're going to return to Joburg. Like, how do you know you're going to do that? That might not be the best call. So maybe the briefing should go like, if we have an engine failure, and we are going to assess where to land. And we have options of, like in Joburg, you have Waterkloof, which people don't think about. If you're on fire and take off on 03, Waterkloof's quite a good option.
Yeah, you just lob back in. That's a good way. So you don't build that pre-programmed course of events in your head.
Don't have any preconceptions, because it could go very wrong for you. Those preconceptions could lead you into a corner that you didn't want to be in. Yeah.
Well, Dan, it's been wonderful chatting to you. Thanks so much for your time. I've learned a lot. It's amazing. Well done for the effort you put in on the day, and obviously you've carried that with your career too. We're getting a lot of comments from people saying, hero, well done, amazing stuff, and really, you guys did a great job, and you've clearly shared the praise with your team, the ATC, everything. Remember to go and buy Fani a beer, and if we get together, beer's on me.
Well, sure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me tell my story. I appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers, Dan. Take care.
Thank you. Ciao.
Well, folks, thanks. It's been a lot of fun. It's been interesting. It's been an eye-opener and learning, and a real-life hero in real life, live. So thanks for joining the show. Please stay tuned till next time.